This morning, our scripture reading comes to us from the Gospel of Luke, chapter 6. An expert in the law stood up to test Jesus. "Teacher," he said, "what must I do to inherit eternal life?" He said to him, "What is written in the law? What do you read there?" And he answered, "You shall love the Lord your God with all your heart and all your soul and with all your strength and with all your mind, and your neighbor as yourself." And he said to him, "You have given the right answer. Do this and you will live." But wanting to vindicate himself, he asked Jesus, "And who is my neighbor?" Well, this is the question we each must ask ourselves. Who is our neighbor? This year, we celebrate 32 years as an open and affirming congregation. It's pretty incredible to look back and remind ourselves what the world looked like 32 years ago. If you were gay and you were Christian, most of the time, you had to go to church closeted. There just weren't any churches that would openly welcome queer people. Now, they weren't all overtly hateful. They usually aren't overt about it, right? But this was the early 90s, and the AIDS epidemic was in full swing. I was a young adolescent at the time, and if I knew anything about AIDS, it was something that existed far away, maybe like in New York or up there in San Francisco. I knew nothing of it in Orange County. It was invisible. And the truth is, most gay people were invisible. It was safer that way. But in 1990, things started heating up in Irvine. There was a movement within our city to basically remove rights from LGBT people so that they could be discriminated against legally. Our pastor, the Reverend Fred Plummer, spoke out, and soon our whole congregation did too. After a year-long study, we made an historic vote to become open and affirming, and we were the first church in Orange County to do so. It dramatically changed the trajectory for IUCC for the better, because that's when we became a true sanctuary. Now, we've grown over the years as we've expanded our understanding and our welcome. Since then, we have publicly worked for equality, fighting both Propositions 22 in 2000 and Prop 8 in 2008, which sought to ban equal marriage. Our clergy have always been outspoken leaders, and our congregation has proudly marched for equality, both in celebration at pride parades like yesterday, and in protest whenever an injustice occurs. While we have seen many wins, we continue to see hate amplified. Much of the hate we see today towards the LGBTQ+ community is focused on trans people. And these attacks are often violent. Sometimes that's physical violence. It's almost always violent in words. Sometimes it's even deadly. Other times it comes in the form of bans, always manifested in hate rhetoric. And much of that hate has been transferred towards drag queens who have become miscategorized as transgender, demonstrating their obvious ignorance and insensitivity to the differences, alongside with a general disdain for anyone who doesn't fit a cisgender heterosexual profile. 15 state legislators have or are considering bills that in one form or another would ban drag queen story times with children, with these cries of protecting children from sexualization as they demonize drag. And it's not difficult to see all of the anti-trans bills. There's actually a tracker that you can find on translegislation.com, and it reports that in 2023, we've had not even 6 months of 23, these trans bills have been introduced in our country. We have seen 560 bills, 49 states, and 83 of those have passed, 364 are active, and 113 have failed. So I think it's really important that IUCC stands up today and every day to once again affirm our unequivocal commitment to the LGBTQ+ community, to say that we deplore this hatred and we will stand and work against it as we stand with our siblings as children of God together. As you probably know, we hosted our first drag queen bingo, Broadway bingo, actually, along with a story time for kids of all ages with our partners, the Orange County Equality Coalition. We call it Read with Royalty, because we believe it's important to highlight the art form with joy as we celebrate diversity. And so we were thrilled to have Cuckoo Chanel host our Broadway bingo. She's fabulous, and she's coming back. But it became obvious that we wanted, or maybe even more, we needed to have a sacred conversation to better understand why we're doing this. What's it all about? What does it mean? Not just to us as a community, but for everyone who's affected. So this morning, we're going to have an opportunity to learn. We have invited several guests to join us. Each of our guests are very different, and yet there are some who would demonize all of them. Just yesterday, we saw some of the vocals who, in this neck of the woods, are basically just annoying loudmouths. But as we've already mentioned, they are all across America, and people are trying to make life harder, more unsafe, and downright horrifying for too many queer people. Did you know there's actually a travel warning put out by the HRC, the Human Rights Campaign, along with also the NAACP and LULAC? It's not just hate for one, it's pretty broad spectrum there. All in the state of Florida. It's not safe. It's not safe. So we want to be people who create safe spaces. Here, in this safe sanctuary, we want to listen, we want to learn, and we want to grow. So now I want to welcome our guests. You're going to grab a chair as I do. First of all, I want to introduce you to someone you probably already know. She's a regular at Second Service, our own Christine Roy. Christine has been a member at IUCC for over 10 years. She is a deacon and a worship leader. We know her for her kind heart, her funny personality, and her consistent presence among us. And I also want to welcome, for the first time, Ginger Klee, who is a multi-ethnic Korean genderqueer mental health professional, a psychology professor, and a national speaker on the intersections of race, ethnicity, and the LGBTQ+ mental health. And I also want to introduce you, if you don't already know her, you've been missing out. Because today, this morning, we have the one, the only, Cuckoo Chanel back with us. She embraces drag as an art form and is here to share it with us this morning. So I'm going to begin with just asking them each a question. If you would tell us, oh, I got to give you this, don't I? If you would just tell us a little bit about yourselves, addressing your own journey, about how you came to be here, what it's like to be a queer person, and engage us in a conversation about why this matters. Who are you?
I'm Christine Roy. It says so on my name tag, so I'm official. I've been a member here for 10 years, and I'm a transgender woman. And basically, my quick biography was some of my earliest memories are watching my older sisters who were junior high school age when I was a small child. Just get ready to go out and do things, just, live their life. At that time, it was headbands, and they had the flip hairstyles and lots of hairspray in our house. And I just thought, I'm going to do that someday. That will be me. And I didn't think of it any more than a child would think, like, I want to be a fireman, or I want to be this. So anyways, then I went to school. And school at that time, and I suppose today it might be the same, they really segregate into boys over here, girls over there. And the activities are separated by gender. Nobody asked me, do you want to be a brownie or a Cub Scout? It was one or the other. And so anyways, I just thought, well, somebody has to be the boy. I'll be a boy. And I did that for many years. I mean, I had to survive in the world, so I got an education. I got a good job. I bought a house. I did the things that people do. But I never felt comfortable in the role as a man. And just eventually, believe it or not, it took till 2010. I finally got the courage and got it through my head that this is not going away. And I began my transition in earnest. And it's been quite a journey. But the main thing I've gotten out of it is I've become a much more confident, happy, whole person, because I'm no longer hiding. I used to have to hide a lot, and that really is not a good way to live. So anyways, I'm now the person you know, and I'm very happy to be here. Thanks.
Hi, my name is Ginger Klee, they, she pronouns. Also, everyone was commenting on my shirt the first time, so I'm going to read it to you. It says Plants Against Gender Norms. And then it has different flags, like the intersex flag, which is not talked about enough, but anyway. So I grew up, I've lived most of my life in California, but my formative years were in Kentucky and Tennessee. So this kind of church experience is very different in a good way for me. My first time being completely myself, authentic self in a church space. And growing up, ever since I could have consciousness, I fought against my mother about being super feminine. And my mom is the epitome of femininity. Like, she's beautiful. She always has to have full face on at all times outside of the home. And she forced me to wear dresses, and I would throw tantrums. And even how I'm sitting would be like, oh, how dare you? So it was quite a struggle growing up with someone so feminine and wanting me to be just like her. I came out as queer, as a lesbian, back in 2007, 2008, which was terrifying because of Prop 8 at the time. And that felt okay, I always identified at the time as like a tomboy, and that was fine. But once I'm a mental health professional. I have my own practice in Los Alamitos. Once I really started working with more LGBTQ clients and teaching like sexuality and having younger students, I started to really question gender more and more. Like, I had someone ask me, like, what makes you a woman? I was like, that's a great question that I can't answer. And so really with that, and then the pandemic where everyone kind of got a reset in a way of like, I can wear pajamas to work because you're only seeing me from here. And just being liberated by not feeling like I have to wear makeup and to look professional and all of that. And then, fun fact, today's actually my 1-year wedding anniversary to my wife. So when it went up to leading up to our wedding of like, what am I going to wear? How am I going to present myself? What do I want to look back 10, 20, 40 years from now at our wedding photos, and what do I want to see? Because the expectation was always just, of course, you'll wear a dress. And that's what really started to create more discomfort in me. And I know that, like, you know, butch lesbians don't wear dresses often or whatever, but that title didn't fit me either. And so I realized that living as an assigned gender is not the same thing as living as a cisgender person. So that's why genderqueer has fit more and more for me and helped me feel more like myself. So, yeah.
Hi, I'm Cuckoo Chanel. In drag, my pronouns are she, her, and I kind of have a twofold story because obviously we've got drag and then my personal life. I am outside of drag a gay man, and I had a relatively easy time with that. I'm very, very fortunate. I had a very loving family that kind of indulged all my silliness. I got to play with dolls and wear wigs and pretend I was Shania Twain, and they were very supportive of me when I kind of came out. I was not very much in a closet. It was very, very obvious. And I think sometime in high school, like my freshman year when I was 14 years old, I kind of just posted on Facebook saying, yes, okay, I'm gay, you can all stop asking because I'm getting really annoyed by it. And then with drag, I kind of found that, because I was an actor my whole life, and I gave that up at the end of college for me because I needed stable income. And yeah, not the way to go, right? And so I missed performing so bad. And so right before the pandemic, me and my best friend, we loved Drag Race, we loved watching it, we loved going to shows and everything. And she was like, you could do this. And I was like, stop, okay. You're right, I can. And so I did. And then the bug bit me, and I've been so fortunate to see it bloom into this crazy thing that I'm headlining and hosting OC Pride yesterday. I get to be on movie sets. I get to do story time. I get to be in like music videos and weird things. And I'm so grateful for it. And it gave me my art back. So, yeah.
My first question I'm going to pose to Christine, as I said, it seems like we've really seen this uptick of trans hate over the last several years. Those bills that we talked about, those bans that are happening across the nation certainly reflect that. So can you talk about why you personally think this is happening and how that feels, and what we can do to support you and trans people locally, throughout the nation, and across the world?
Okay, well, I mean, personally, I feel horrible that it's happening. But as Sarah said, there's been over 500 bills just in 2023. Some are against drag shows, some are against using preferred pronouns, some are against transgender people and medical care. And so basically, the reason why I think this is happening is it gets people scared. It's the same thing that happened to gay people that are older may have recognized what's going on from maybe 30, 40 years ago. People are being mischaracterized as far as like, oh, those people do horrible things. Those people are bad people, and we need to pass laws against them. And it generates fear, and they're trying to motivate people through fear to vote for them or to side with them. And I also think it's a very common, if you've studied history, it's an authoritarian tactic to pick a group and make them another. And also, ultimately, this whole thing from gay rights, I mean, we've seen it from women's rights, gay rights, to now trans rights. It's ultimately misogynistic. The ultimate goal would be to control women. And so that affects all of us more than just trans people. But yeah, it's definitely a scary time.
Thank you. And Ginger, for many of us, the language of non-binary still feels really new. In fact, as I was chatting with our mutual friend, Danny Cesenia, who is the director of the California LGBTQ Health and Human Services Network, and I was asking him for someone who identifies as non-binary to lead us in this conversation, he explained that you are genderqueer. And that's on the non-binary spectrum, but I didn't even know where that fit. So I realized that I needed some education on this, and I figured that if I need it, maybe some of you might need it too. can you talk about the spectrum, what it means to be genderqueer, why pronouns matter, how we can adjust our language to make those who don't fit a cisgender mold feel more comfortable?
Sure. First off, a common misconception is that it's new, but like European colonization is what erased the gender non-binary. And like there's a really great map online that will show you worldwide that there's a history of more than 2 genders, again, across the world, including in our country. Our Native and Indigenous communities are a perfect example of that. And the only reason why it feels new is because they did a great job, trying to erase it, but I hate, again, I'm going to say it again, even though I said it earlier. Just like cockroaches, we're just not going to go away. Like, you can try to get rid of us, but we're always going to be here, and fabulous, more fabulous than ever. So, but I'm glad we're talking about it more and giving it more recognition, because it even helps someone like me really understand that later in life. So gender non-binary generally tends to mean that someone doesn't identify as man or woman. They're a person, right? Genderqueer can be a little bit more fluid in the sense of I don't completely reject like womanhood. Like I enjoy being called a wife, being called an auntie, a dog mama, like those things I'm not adverse to those things, but I don't feel completely aligned with womanhood either. And enjoy embracing my masculine androgynous side. So that's kind of a brief idea of what those 2 things look like. But just like anything, language constantly evolves and changes. That's just a part of our world, of our history, including in the US, right? Like ain't is now in the dictionary, which drives me crazy. As someone that used to want to be an English teacher. And I know that it can feel foreign to use they, them pronouns to address a singular person, but we do that anyway, right? Someone left their umbrella. That is a singular, pronoun, or I'm sorry, that's a singular noun. I don't know. You're using with a plural pronoun. Also, for some genderqueer people, plural also still does fit for them, right? Because they can maybe feel both man and woman. So grammatically, that can also work anyway. And it takes practice. I've misgendered people on accident. It happens. But, just like calling someone the wrong name, we don't, profusely apologize and make it a huge deal. Like, oh, I'm sorry, your name's not Fred, it's Robert. My bad. People tell me all the time that I don't look like my name should be Ginger because I don't have red hair. But they call me Ginger anyway because that's my name. Right? Like, oh, I don't look ginger, I'm sorry, but that's still my name, and people respect that. So if you can do that with a name, you can do that with pronouns too. It just takes practice.
And Cuckoo, I felt that the uptick in hate towards drag queens is this displaced hate that's aimed at trans people. But as a drag queen, you have, I suppose, the privilege or the reality that you take the makeup off. And as a drag queen, though, you are the target of a lot of hate. I mentioned before that I myself have experienced this because at my previous congregation, we hosted drag queen story time, and a lot of mean, bad behavior came out. So we wondered if, and incidentally, we also hosted it here recently, and we didn't have the mean, bad behavior, so we feel pretty lucky and hopeful, but we know that it's out there. So I wondered if you could begin by telling us a brief history of drag queen performances. Is this just fun and entertainment, or is there a statement being made?
Definitely. I think it's a little bit of both, but before I answer that, I want to give a 2-sentence little spiel that I wish I gave at the last one. A lot of the bills and hate being aimed at drag queens is an attack on trans people in disguise, and it's really important to know that and look at the language of these bills, because what they're saying we can't do for drag bans and things like that is language that then prevents trans people from just going to the grocery store in the bodies and the clothes that they're most comfortable in, because it's basically saying you can't go out in public dressed as the gender you were not assigned at birth. So make sure you pay attention to the language and realize it's just affecting my ability to go perform at night, but it's affecting somebody else's entire life. You know what I mean? But in terms of entertainment or political, both. Drag has its roots in entertainment. Drag actually means dressed as girl, and it comes from ancient Greek and Roman theater where men performed the women roles because women were not allowed on stage. And that tradition continued well throughout history. We saw it in Shakespeare, and it's been very still recent in a lot of Asian cultures too with some of their performance styles, but things are starting to change pretty much everywhere at this point where women are allowed on stage. But that's how things got its start. And then I like to see modern drag as so what I do and what contemporaries of me would do if you're at a club or watching RuPaul's Drag Race, things like that. I think our drag comes from ballroom culture. And if you don't know what that is, it's a very underground queer thing, mainly for people of color in bigger cities especially. New York was the biggest one, obviously. 70s, 80s, 90s is when it was the most prevalent, but it's always been around and it's still around, and it's a great place. And they would come together with these chosen families and put on these grand balls and perform and walk in these categories. And I think the fashion and the lip syncing and the performance and things that we do now as entertainers come from those joyous celebrations of ballroom culture. So it's a little bit of both, and I think the political side of drag is pretty much putting up this big middle finger to societal norms of what you'd expect out of people and queer people especially. So.
I have more for you. As a woman and a feminist woman, somebody asked me if I felt offended by what seems to be a hyperbolic representation of women, sometimes a hypersexual representation. And I absolutely can understand this concern, and I was actually glad that someone came to me with it. So can you speak to this idea that some people might be offended by a man impersonating a woman, just as they are offended by a white person applying blackface to impersonate a black individual?
Yeah, so I view drag and all of my friends and everyone I've ever met that does drag as this giant love letter to the women in their life and the women that inspired them and got them through their hardships. So for me, my drag is basically me trying to recreate the looks and the performance styles of all the women. I had the posters on my wall that I ripped out of the magazines, like Hilary Duff and Britney Spears and all this, right? Because when I was growing up and didn't feel like I belonged in the world that I was born into, I was like, oh, I want to be them because they're somebody and they're so special, and I feel like I need to be special like them, and so now I get to do that. I have a friend who their drag name is actually their sister's name, that her sister was bullied for all the time because it's like a cultural name for her. And her sister was always told growing up that she would never be beautiful. And so she said, I'm going to take this name and I'm going to bring it to the stage, and people are going to say it when they announce me in front of 100 people, and then when I get off the stage, everyone's going to tell me I'm beautiful. So I'm going to make this name something beautiful so my sister can be proud of who she is. So that's how I view drag. That's how the people close to me view drag. I feel like that's how the majority of drag queens view drag. There are the few outliers that definitely accentuate themselves in very ridiculous ways, and it can be a bit of camp, but I think it's supposed to be entertainment purposes. It can be disrespectful, unfortunately, and for those people, sorry they don't get the vibes, you know what I mean? As compared to blackface, I think the important distinction is that what we do, we try to do with respect, and we're here to put on a show for you and have fun and engage in the community, and like I said, do a love letter to women. But blackface is intentionally racist. It is intentionally poking fun at marginalized communities. It's creating a caricature of somebody at their expense, and that is definitely not what we try to do. We try to honor the women that inspired us.
Glad you have articulated it, because as I said earlier, I can feel it. I can feel the difference. I recognize when I've seen men dress up and it feels really misogynistic and it feels bad and there's this icky feeling inside, and I can feel the difference, but I can't always articulate that. And I appreciate you doing so, and I very much appreciate your art form. Finally, I want to talk about the fact that we've seen all these protests. We've witnessed bookstores losing their stores, where their landlords come and take their stores away from them. Libraries get shut down. Last month, I preached about some of our sister churches across the nation who have literally been burned and bombed with Molotov cocktails because they've supported drag queens. But even well-intentioned people might object to having a drag queen program affiliated with a church. So can you address why you think it matters that a church would invite you, why it's important? Maybe how you felt the first time you were called and said, can you come be a drag queen at this church in Irvine? Can you talk about that? Why does it matter?
Let me tell you, when I got the call and they're like, you want to come do drag bingo at a church? I was like, no. But I actually got that call from Craig, who I'm sure you all know and love, and he is a near and dear friend of mine. He was actually my college acting professor. So I was like, well, Craig's not going to kill me. We're good. I was like, all right, I'll go. I'll see what happens. And, you know, wound up being amazing, and I'm so glad to now be a part of this and continuing on. But I think it's so important to have people like me in a church and be here with all of you and get to talk to all of you as well, because I think society has put this huge divide between us because we don't go together, right? Like LGBTQ plus and then church has always been this separate thing, and we're each scared of the other one, is how society has taught us to act. So to have me sit here and tell my story, maybe I become a little bit more real, I become a little bit more human. I'm not the scary tall thing with the big poofy wig down the street, you know what I mean? And then I get to meet all of you after, and I'm like, oh, they don't want to send me to the H-word place. So I think it's so important that we have these open dialogue conversations. And I learned something today when I was talking out on the patio after the first sermon. Someone was like saying to me, how do I word this? She was like, seeing you perform and drag queens perform has made me as a woman feel more comfortable in my body and want to celebrate my body as a woman, because you as a man dressed as a woman, you're having so much fun and you love your body and you love being a woman for that small period of time. Why shouldn't I love being a woman? And I was like, I've never thought about that. So, you know, I would have never heard that if I didn't come to church on Sunday. So that's why it's important.
And to all of you, the same question. What does it mean to be here? Were you surprised that we called?
Yes, I was very surprised. I mean, I've known open and affirming churches exist. I have actually worked with a lot of queer Christian clients, and I still do. But, you know, I've even had my own religious trauma. And so, you know, knowing that Danny was our middle person helped a lot and helped me feel comfortable. When I told a couple of friends, though, they were like, that's how you want to start your 1-year anniversary? I'm like, yes, apparently it is. But yeah, so now, you know, now that I've had this somewhat reparative experience, I can, you know, not just hypothetically share with my Christian queer clients that being in an open affirming church can be healing, right? That and the fact that you're all not just inviting people to worship here, but you're all here learning from us. That is what true advocacy and allyship is. You know, everyone can post rainbows everywhere, which I do love them. This is wonderful. I love the aesthetic. Yes, this is amazing. But that in itself is just performative. But committing to constantly learning about LGBTQ and gender, among other marginalized and minority groups, is what true advocacy and allyship is. And so that's what I really appreciate.
Well, I have already been here, so I kind of knew this was coming. But I appreciate, the opportunity to get up and speak to you. And I want to kind of touch on something that Ginger said. In the people I know in the trans community, I often say that church is a 4-letter word. So there has been a lot of intolerance, and this is not news to anybody, but coming from churches. And for myself, I think I get a little bit insulated because I come here all the time, and I think, no, that's not what church is. This is church. So it's something to keep in mind. There's been a lot of damage done, so there will have to be a lot done to repair our relationships. But speaking to that, I'm usually a deacon, so I'm usually out in the narthex, and then when it's time to do the offering, I'll come in and sit in the back, and that's during the prayers. And there's been people that have been praying for trans rights. Even when I'm feeling too self-conscious, like, oh, I don't want to speak up. I don't know if I should say anything. Will anybody hear me? I'm way in the back. Somebody says it for me. And to feel that I'm seen by a group of people really means a lot during this time. So thank you.
Thank you. Oh, one more thing.
Sorry.
Leave us with the last and final word.
I don't want to be too negative, but I want to jump on that really fast. When I used to attend church actively, and I started making some queer friends, I would flat out have them say, aren't you supposed to hate me? Once I told them I was a Christian, and I have some Christian friends, especially in Tennessee right now, where they've even told me they're not even sure they want to tell people they're Christian, or that they struggle to identify as Christian anymore, even though their faith hasn't changed, because they recognize more and more that a lot of people in our community don't feel safe with that, which is really a shame, right? This is a wonderful place that you've all created, but sometimes it can make us feel like we're in a bubble, especially being in Southern California, right? So, yeah.
Thank you for naming that, because it's something that we talk about and think about all the time, why we feel like we almost have to come out as progressive Christians, and why it's important for us to share this. We're so afraid of proselytizing that we don't even want to tell someone, but at the same time, we recognize that if we don't say anything, we've given Christianity away. So that's why it's so important for us to exist as a community and to speak out and to use Jesus' name, because he was an inclusive, radical lover of all people who broke down barriers, and that's who we follow. We need to name that and be vocal about it and share the good news. So thank you so much for naming it. Thank you all for being here. We are so grateful to have you. Come down here. The tickets are available now for July 28th. You gotta come see Cuckoo Chanel for Broadway Bingo. It is so fabulous. You could win some money. You'll definitely have a good time, and it's just an incredible opportunity to fundraise for our congregation. So now, brothers and sisters, siblings in Christ, go out into a world that feels so broken sometimes, where hate screams loudly and injustice, ignorance, and violence just permeate. And sow the seeds of love. Connect in conversation, embrace diversity, find your neighbor and give them a hug. Celebrate the spectrum, rainbow people, and work to build the kingdom, because everybody matters, and everyone should be seen and heard and loved just as they are, just as you are. So share the love and carry the light.
We have all witnessed your presence. We have received your grace.